are we in a recession already, or are we about to enter a recession? And all the economic data would suggest that economic activity is indeed slowing down, but at the same time, unemployment is not only very low, but still dropping, which would be very unusual in a recession. But either way, I want to reframe the question and illustrate why it probably doesn't matter as much as you may think. So when people ask, are we in a recession? Are we headed for one? I think the real question behind that is, do I need to change my investment strategy? Is the market about to crash? And believe it or not, identifying or timing a recession doesn't really help that very much. It doesn't help answer that. So to start, even defining a recession is not that straightforward. The original definition was 2 declining quarters of real GDP, so negative GDP growth for 2 quarters in a row. But then more recently, the NBER, which is the group that officially gets to declare recessions, they've come up with a more kind of vague, subjective definition. But whichever one you use, you don't find out until well after the fact. And so let's go over a couple examples here to show how that played out, because not only do you see you don't know recessions until well after, but the stock market doesn't always correspond how you may think. So for example, take the last recession we had at the beginning of 2020 with COVID. It only lasted 2 months, very, very short. And by the time it was announced that a recession had begun, it was also announced that it ended several months ago, and the stock market had bottomed and then recovered at that point. So it all happened very quickly. But to contrast that, in the early 2000s, the unwinding of the tech bubble, there was a recession in the middle of 2001. However, the stock market had already declined 18% before the recession started. It was only down 7% during the actual recession, but then following that, it was down another 29% after the recession. So even if you had timed the recession part perfectly, it probably wouldn't have helped from an investment standpoint. I want to show this chart to continue to illustrate this point. So this shows stock market returns 6 months before a recession, during the recession, and then several periods after the recession. And what may surprise you if you look towards the center there and look at the returns during the actual recession, so this is the last 12 recessions in the US, and half the returns are positive. So 6 out of 12 times we had positive returns during a recession. So it just goes to show the market is unpredictable and doesn't always correspond to the economic data. What's more important, I think, in this table, though, is if you look out to the right at the longer term returns, you see that everything's positive and most of the returns are quite high. And so that's why we always point to the big picture to long-term investment strategies, because whether you invest before, during, or after a recession, if you stay the course and invest with a long time horizon, the results are usually pretty good. So when it comes down to it, identifying or timing a recession really doesn't help you much from an investment standpoint, which brings up another point. A word we've been hearing a lot lately is uncertainty. We're in a very uncertain time. There's a lot of economic or geopolitical uncertainty. And we certainly wouldn't argue with that, but that's always the case. We're always in a period of uncertainty. There may be some issues right now that are unique to this period, but if you look back in history, even during the most stable markets, the strongest economies, if you look back at headlines during those periods, it'll seem like the world is just chaos and there's all sorts of risks. And there's always risks, but some may not materialize, or the market may do well in spite of those risks. But there's only certainty in hindsight, never in the moment. And so rather than trying to become more certain about things that are simply unknowable or unpredictable, our approach is to accept, even embrace that uncertainty. And like Don said earlier, you don't get any reward without the risk. So you have to be willing to take some risk, accept some volatility, and that's how you get rewarded with those long-term returns.